Okay. Hello, my name is David Davies. I'm a technology journalist and a contributing writer to Feed magazine. For this latest roundtable masterclass, we're going to be looking at the state of remote and hybrid broadcast in the wake of the pandemic. Necessity being the mother of invention, there was a marked increase in the amount of remote hybrid broadcast production being undertaken during COVID-19. But now that the pandemic has receded, there are signs that many of the new techniques and technologies adapted during the crisis period are being continued on a permanent basis. So in this session, we're going to find out how remote hybrid broadcast is developing in 2023 and some of the challenges that still need to be addressed. So first of all, then, the big question, I suppose, is to what extent do you think that the pandemic era did initiate a kind of a new stage in remote hybrid broadcasting, and in what kind of ways has that manifested itself? I wondered if, Jeremy, you might kick us off with that one.
Well, thank you, David. For us, it was kind of what I've noticed in broadcast and remote production. It was a big move to kind of evolve a lot of the equipment because you had to deal with a lot of folks who couldn't, there was a reduction of staff on site. There's a lot of remote capabilities that people were asking for. And a lot of that demand came down to bandwidth capabilities. So we have products now, and we've added mobile internet capability, a gateway mode to our mobile transmitter, which allows people to just turn it into a very well blended internet connection in the field. So it's a mobile hotspot for them that can use 6 cellular modems on our LTE version and then 4 on our 5G version. So it allowed people to really move towards IP, which enabled folks like Panasonic and other folks like that can do remote IP access and needing more bandwidth. So it allows people to do more in the field now with less personnel on hand, which is, I think, something that's been trending and moving in that direction. So that was a big way of kind of how it manifested. And then we also had a lot of people realize that their home internets weren't always the best to be able to push UDP traffic. So that was the other part that we saw. So we were working on we have the gateway platform, which we've been using to provide home internet at the beginning of the pandemic. And then as we built that capability into our mobile transmitters, folks were just using our mobile transmitters for that same capability now. So different form factors, but the same capability, and people are really liking it because it enables them to do more with less in the field, and faster file movement, faster access to the cloud to be able to get access to it. So there's a lot of improvements that have gone on there, but it kind of helped nudge folks along from really moving to more IP-based workflows. And that's one of the biggest things that we've seen.
Guilhem, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I think for us, the past 3 years have been quite interesting because it's true that there was a big surge in the demand for streaming in general. That's very clear. And it's true that 3 years ago, the events, some of the events continued to happen. But of course, people either were not allowed to go there or couldn't go there or whatever. And then there was this big transition from, okay, people are attending the events live, and okay, maybe they will be shot and broadcasted as well, but that's maybe, to we now need to shoot basically everything that moves, and to transmit it, whether it's in the corporate world or live events or concerts or whatever, because people, didn't want to miss the opportunity to create content and to transmit the contents because it was still very much in demand, especially when you have people locked at home. you obviously need the content. So there was a big request for that. Both in terms of PTZ, we sold tons of PTZ cameras during that era, still are doing so. Camcorders as well, that's quite clear. And I mean, I think people found it also quite easy to use because our cameras are already supporting, the necessary protocols and whatnot inside. So it's not that we had, I would say, to adjust technically. The products were already there and they were readily available, so people started to use them for this kind of application. So yeah, very big demand in terms of streaming and so on. And then it pushed the remote production story further quite fast. So in that regard, clearly, it gave a big push. That's clear.
John, I know certainly from writing about this previously that Doc10 certainly had a big expansion of its kind of virtual sets and virtual production operations during the pandemic. What were the kind of implications on the sort of remote and hybrid side?
Well, I think it's fair to say that from our perspective that the pandemic didn't necessarily initiate it, really. I think because we were very much working down the path of that, because we were finding quite a lot of our broadcaster partners were beginning to demand more and more remote type working from a sustainability point of view. But certainly from the pandemic, without any question of doubt, it sort of significantly fueled its escalation because of the obvious reasons for people not being able to travel and not being able to get around. And I think from our perspective, most of our use were around obviously event-based activity. We've got 9-10 studios at our facility, along with lots of other facilities on site. But obviously, we work with a lot of partners that are working on events all over the world, and our connectivity that we have there enables that connectivity to anywhere. But of course, productions are now, we're really beginning to think, actually, do we need to send all these people there? Do we need to send all this equipment there? And therefore, from that point of view, the fact that we were already working on that path, both in a post-production world and a studio world, that it really did escalate it quicker than we would normally have expected to do. But the good news was we were pretty ready to go, to be fair. We were already working with partners, and I think we are predominantly based at Media City in Salford. And so although we absolutely put our own facilities out on location in certain places, more often than not, we're working with partners, outside broadcast partners on big events. We've done major events like the Olympics, like the World Cups, the various elements of it. And some of that has been very much remote based, with the hub effectively being at Doc10. So I think the thing, I think one of the question really is that people are now, the expectation was, will it come back? Will people just migrate to their old ways of working? And absolutely not. Without a doubt, people recognize the value of not moving that people around. But there are some challenges, without any question of doubt, in terms of how you deliver some of those productions.
So coming on to the next question, I mean, that being the case, and obviously we have seen this expansion, are we now sort of set for a period where people are investing significantly in new technology? Are they sort of looking and addressing and reviewing their workflows to make sure that they can deliver what they need? And is that, do you sort of see a big cycle of investment now coming up as a result of that, so that people kind of can crystallize the way that they do remote broadcast? Actually, John, do you want to come in on that one first?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found that is quite interesting is finding the right balance of how we use our facilities, because we have lots of facilities on site. And quite often when productions require the use of those facilities, they don't require them in a simple way. Quite often they want all of the home comforts that they're normally used to while sat in a big studio complex. So for us, it's finding the balance between being able to offer that, but then potentially have an empty studio sat local that somebody else might want to use, versus the complications around adding remote working. One thing we are finding is that because it's event based, and I think what it is doing is it's enabling smaller elements, like maybe smaller sport production, for example, whereas you imagine big Premier League football games, they're covered off in many ways. But when it comes to things like maybe hockey or maybe other lesser sports, if that's the right phrase, I'm sure people will get me up on that. But I think the thing is, it's now enabling some of that, because they can't normally afford to have a huge outside broadcast vehicle there. They can't afford to have all these facilities there. And actually, quite often they want multiple events happening at the same time. So having a hub, which basically can switch between the various local sources, means that it just gives you so much more flexibility. And so for us, it's about trying to find that balance of using our facilities, also looking at different technologies in terms of perhaps lesser best-in-class technologies to be able to enable some of these facilities, because actually some of these guys, they might want broadcast values in terms of their production, but they've not got broadcast budgets. So there may be a way of compromising a little bit on actually what do you need, and maybe less cameras and less comms and less elements of that. But it's all achievable. It's just really having to adapt to every one of the cases. And unfortunately, none of them are the same. They all want more than they usually you'd expect them to perhaps have or want. And they're all different. They're all quite difficult to well, not difficult, but they're actually different in terms of their requirements.
Guilhem, I think you mentioned there obviously both your kind of corporate and broadcast media customers. I think it might be interesting just to get a sense from you about how their approach to investment in new technology to support remote production has developed lately. I mean, could you sort of give us a bit of a sense of that?
Yep. Yeah, well, when it comes to remote production, for us at the moment, it really means broadcast. I mean, in the broadest way, in live events. When it comes to the remote, to the corporate market, we are not really talking about remote production. It's more like local use. So I cannot really say for the corporate market, but for sure, in terms of broadcasting and live events, there is a clear demand growing in this direction. And we were also asked by customers to adapt the product further to meet that request without getting too much into the technical details. For example, we are now putting ST2110 support also with compressed ST2110 using JPEG XS, these kind of things directly into the cameras. So we just released, for example, some PTZ cameras which are natively able to output ST2110 compressed and uncompressed on top of the usual suspects like NDI, SRT. SRT is also, very much in demand lately, and it seems like people are really happy with this protocol from the feedback we get. And so we implemented SRT years ago already. It was in the camera, even during the pandemics, or the start of the pandemics. Of course, we had stuff like RTMPS already inside, and SRTs and NDI. And now we are now in the process of implementing ST2110 in the studio cameras, in the PTZ cameras, because there is, for example, this demand to have JPEG XS directly out of the camera head or out of the PTZ head. So yeah, definitely, I think that that people are going to pursue this direction, and thus asking for the right products, to be developed by manufacturers such as Panasonic.
And then over to you, Jeremy. I mean, what sense do you get from your customers at the moment? Are they, having realized that they've got this new way of working and they want to pursue it, are they now sort of gearing up for a cycle of spending, do you think, on new equipment?
Absolutely. I think the other thing that goes along with that is showing that, a lot of times when you go into a customer, they're used to using your products in a certain way after a certain amount of time. We have our mobile transmitters, our Engo line, which is, progressed now to the Engo 3, which is a 5G product. The big thing on that one is, we've added other things to it along the way. Of course, it'll stream video and it'll do. We have, a multi-camera unit that's coming out, or that is released. And we also have, a 4K unit that's released. But I think people are, as you guys are alluding to, they're trying to do more with less and at the same time. And a lot of that comes down to bandwidth constraints now, too, that they're finding for these remote productions. Because budget, as we're all finding out, is very impacted by the bandwidth that you're also asking for. Because a lot of times when you go to these remote sites, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg to get that, that fiber connection or whatnot. So what we've also been able to do is, with this cellular structures that are already in place, give people bandwidth where they can do a multi-camera shoot, where they're, plugging in multiple IP cameras into our mobile units and into our rack-mounted gateways, so that way they can do more in the field. That includes, return video. They could do remote lighting. They can do a lot of different things where they can go in and remote control it because the bandwidth is there. And that's really what our products are really doing now, is we're delivering high quality, resilient bandwidth with carrier diversity on there where folks can do more with less. Because as we were finding out, remote productions is, are you going to be paying for this, a SAT truck to come out to do all this stuff? The SAT, as you're seeing, then you have, folks like Starlink and the other different satellite carriers that are coming out and trying to optimize on those as well. So for us, the great thing is like, those are just other WAN connections for us. So we just blend them all together and provide a single internet connection to that end user. So they have a public facing IP, and we can do a lot of different networking behind it to be able to keep those secure connections even in the field.
Excellent. Okay, well, you sort of hinted at kind of an area that we're going to touch on in the next question about the technical and logistical challenges. Obviously, bandwidth is absolutely going to be one of those. But I also wanted to sort of touch on the kind of the extent to which this new way of working requires upskilling or retraining of staff, and some of the other kind of more longer term kind of existential, I suppose, questions around remote production. John, can you give us a sense of, you mentioned there in your introduction about some of the challenges you see as being addressed. What are the big ones that we need to be tackling over the next couple of years if this is really going to achieve its full potential, do you think?
Yeah, it's a big subject, to be fair, because particularly in our world, because the people we're dealing with, the productions we're dealing with, and in some cases the partners we're working with, the outside broadcast partners, the SAT truck guys, or whoever, they've all got different equipment. They've all got different elements of this, and we're looking to be the hub that talks to everybody, really, and we can do that. However, every individual production and every individual company that you work with have got their bespoke elements of that. And so what you've got is that certain people have certain audio facilities and video facilities, different type of cameras, how they're going to connect from the communications point of view, talkback, etc. And of course, you've got this balance that sometimes there's a requirement, for example, that we may want to rack the cameras from our hub to on location, but sometimes they may not want to do that. They want to have local control. So there's an element really about certain skills will always need to be on site, unless you've, for example, cameras, unless you've got local cameras or robotic cameras, then you're always going to need people on site to actually pan and, the elements of that. PTZ's great, but unfortunately on a football game, it probably wouldn't work as such, or not enough anyway. But what we're finding is that those people are having to sometimes work on location and sometimes having to work on site in our world as such. And so people are having to get used to the different ways of actually not just worry about the physical elements of the products that they're working with on site, but obviously how to get to another site, how to make sure things are synchronous, because you can imagine there's lots and lots of video and audio delays in the process. So, from our point of view, we have to spend more money in just things like synchronization tools to make sure that actually things are in sync when we get to make sure, because we've got multiple cameras, multiple types of signals coming in, whether it's HD, 4K, whatever it is, the various flavors of that. And of course, from a training point of view, it just means that all of a sudden it's added a new complexity about the types of requirements for each person. I mean, they're used to walking on site, doing various things in a certain way, and that's it. And all of a sudden now we say, now you're now connecting back to a local hub, you're doing this, you're doing that. So there's a lot of that needs to be required. And I think from obviously with most of certainly the broadcast community is freelance based. And so those guys are actually going to have to spend time doing that. Otherwise, they will struggle when they hit the locations or working our facility.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, as well as apart from the whole bandwidth issue, what do you see as being the next kind of pivotal steps, I suppose, industry?
Well, it's fine-tuning the software to work with the customer workflows too, as you guys are saying. A lot of it, as John was hinting at, is like you run into a ton of different use cases and a ton of different equipment wherever you go. So for us, primarily it's getting into the IP side of things, yes, but at the same time, there's an inherent transfer of knowledge where you're getting, more IT involved rather than, like your reception and those guys, the receiving side of things, so it's a very different conversations. So security obviously is a very important aspect of that too. So people also want to make sure that they have these secure connections. So that's the other thing that we help enable And that's usually like with remote productions is making sure it's secure. So now we're working inside, the broadcasters, we're working with more of their IT departments for this, right? Because it's coming inbound traffic. How do we make sure it's secure? How do we make sure it's enabled? We've added encryption to our encoders. We've added all these things on there to help with these things. And really how we're working with that is kind of help building that knowledge, but we're also learning and working with our customers and really trying to form and solidify our partnerships with them. And a lot of that is through education. So we've kind of kicked off remote training sessions internally and with external customers as well. So teaching people how to implement these things, and then also getting their feedback of, hey, these are great features, I'm moving to this, and as we've kind of alluded to, all these different protocols that have come into play, and they all in the different ways they behave. So, SRT, NDI, all these different things, being able to pass those is very interesting because they all take their own little nuances, right? And we're able to now, specifically with our gateway product line, is be able to actually move some of the dials and the settings to help optimize to perform in the best way we can. Because obviously on cellular networks, you're going to get variable bit rates and variable, jitter and all these different things. So the way we work on that is our software, which is our smart blending technology, has really worked on keeping that a solid connection for an end user. So we're able to optimize and look at every connection in near real time, almost 50 milliseconds or less, to be able to evaluate those connections and help steer the traffic to help them so they can continue during their workflow. So now we're getting down into the very gritty detail with our customers to really help them do what they need to do in the field. And as you know, too, now that they have this capability, they're like, great, now what else can I do? Mm-hmm. So now that we show up with a box that gives them, decent internet in the field, and they're plugging in all these devices, they're like, oh, great, now what can I do? And so you're seeing a lot of cool ingenuity that a lot of people are bringing to the table. And I really like working with those. We work with small, like you were saying too, John, is like these small broadcasts, remote broadcasts is like, they're doing a stand up, they could be moving their set and doing it outside or doing these different things, covering different more sporting events now. And this is really where we're learning a lot and helping our customers, and have been doing very well in that.
Guilhem, what are your thoughts on this? What are the next steps in terms of, both from a technical point of view and a logistical one as well, in terms of facilitating the next stage of remote production and development?
Yeah, I fully agree about what was said, and also about people on site having to manage the product and so on. Now, as a manufacturer, basically, what I'm a camera manufacturer at that mainly. One thing I would like to add is that we are sometimes, a bit stuck between a rock and a hard place, because we're supposed to manufacture cameras. We are not really supposed to manage this whole workflow or encoding or whatever, that comes after the pictures are actually shot. But to stay relevant, of course, we have to stick our fingers into that as well, because it's customers are expecting that, So what I was saying at the beginning of the discussion is that what we tend to do is try to figure out what are the technologies that our customers, which have obviously much more expertise than we have as a camera manufacturer on the field and managing the production and so on. We are actually asking these guys what they would like to use or what is needed for us to put inside of our camera so that they stay relevant for their use. So I might not be the best guy to answer to this, but what I can say is that definitely, and we've been doing that for quite some years now, we keep our ear to the ground and say, okay, this protocol is probably going to be used. Like, okay, 10 years ago, when we were talking ST2110, it was not a given that this would be, let's say, the protocol of choice for IP transition, broadcast station, and these kind of things. So at some point, we started developing stuff around that, not knowing if it was really going to be fully adopted or not, and so on. So we did, and that was a good thing because it's more and more in demand as of today. for fixed installs, as I said, but for remote production as well. So we have to make a selection, let's say, of the protocols. Some protocols we never, for example, supported, because we did not see the future in that, or maybe the demand was not big enough, and so on and so on. So long story short, we put, as I said, RTMP, RTMPS, then SRT in the cameras, then NDI, then NDI HX, then HX1, then HX2, then now we are working on implementing HX3 at the moment at factory side. Then we had full NDI also inside of the camera, and for this we even had to put a specific chipset, hardware chipset into the camera, unlike NDI, HX, and SRT, but we did that, and it means completely reviewing, the internals of the camera. It's okay, supporting software and so on. You can always do upgrades and stuff like that. But here we are talking about hardware modifications to the cameras to support full NDI, hardware modifications to support ST2110 and so on. So every time it means like a new generation of cameras that have to make sure that these protocols are inside, again, to stay relevant. So we do our best effort to say, okay, this is going to be a mandatory request on the market in 1 year, 2 years. And if we fail to implement that into our cameras, then 2 years down the line, our cameras will not be used anymore. And what is tricky is that to develop a camera is usually 2 years. So it's not like, okay, today I see ST2110, is in request, or SRT is in request, so I can modify the camera. No. You have to start from scratch and do the hardware design again. So you had to be right 2 years prior, not today. So to come back to the question, we implement the protocols that we hope and will be in the end, widely adopted by the customers, and we pray, not to be wrong in our decisions, because ultimately it's development time and cost and so on, and it's a lot of money.
So kind of I extrapolate from all your comments there that one of the big issues here going forward is this need to kind of support a wide range of connectivity, a wide variety of approaches. Obviously that has big implications from an R&D perspective, but also from a kind of, managing everything from a broadcaster and service provider perspective. So would it be fair to say then, and maybe it's a question for each of you in turn, just in the minutes we have left, it's something where you're going to have to kind of, it's a moving target effectively, and you're going to have to kind of be ready to support the various different ways that people want to work and want to develop their own remote production operations. Is that fair to say, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the massive challenges throughout all this, as this new technology gets used and gets put in place, and because of the different purposes that people require of them, standardization of the equipment is just really, really difficult to achieve, because, as I say, depending on the use, it depends on the type of facilities you need. And there'll be people like me that's probably going to Jeremy and Guilhem and saying, what about? Because actually we're getting requirements that come in and say, this is what we now need. And it's very difficult, because it's what is flavor of the month and what is flavor of the month in 2 years' time. It's really difficult. Obviously, you've got to try to use what's available. And without a doubt, I think standardizing is very difficult. Throughout the whole broadcast world, there's been various battles throughout the many years of certain formats versus another format. And I think, even now with 21 tear, with NDI, with even going back to baseband SDI as a starting point and feeding those things back in, a lot of people in the broadcast will still start that way and then say, right, where do I plug this in? And quite often you're working with a partner that has different equipment, different facilities and different interfaces to both ends. And as Jerry mentioned, it's become much more an IT world than a broadcast technology world. And and therefore having, in my case, I have both teams working together, trying to complement them, because the skill set has to absolutely work, because everything these days in the broadcast world is basically set on a computer.
I mean, Jeremy, I suppose obviously in that regard, and you kind of hinted at that, there is this greater alignment that now exists between IT departments and production departments, and that goes across sectors. Presumably that is advantageous, is it, I guess, in negotiating this new landscape?
It's very interesting because at first, it's watching the growth of IT departments at broadcasters has been very interesting, because it used to be one person or a small team. Now it's a huge team with these massive data centers that are running like these small on the receive side, right? And then you have, all right, they're doing all that because now they're trying to enable the field side, because the field side want to do more in this one. So now it's been an interesting growth because, on the IT side, it's very much, they want to keep things secure. They want to keep their networks protected and everything else. So there was a big growth in figuring that out. And then also one of the biggest demands we always hear, like right off the bat, was everyone's like 5G, on the cellular side too. What does that give you? They talk about millimeter wave, in the different waveforms that we're using with 5G. And really, we got to the point where we're starting to talk about technology, as you guys were referring to on the hardware front. We're looking at modems. We're trying to forecast this stuff and look at the modems. The modems are more than capable. So it's not a modem problem. The hardware is capable. It's the networks then. So then we took a step back, and our hardware team, our phenomenal hardware team, looked at it and they said, you know what? Let's optimize the connection to the towers, because that helps get the better connection, because it's not a modem problem. We could throw a bunch of, poor performing connections at it, and sure, it'll do something, but we would rather just optimize that because the bandwidth is there. We just have to figure that out. But on the IT front, it's just been very interesting to tie in with that. So now when we talk to stations, it used to be we'd go and meet, like for remote broadcast and having these conversations, we're talking to directors of technology and, in news operations. Now the IT folks are being brought in too. So it's the dynamic is kind of different, but also we're very much in the way of like, how do we enable these many different types of workflows and becoming as diverse as we can? Because like John was alluded to too, you go and it just depends on who you're talking to at that time. And even stations within different groups trying to do remote broadcast are doing it in different ways, because they may not have the full upgrades at their facility. They're waiting on the upgrades for their facility. So it's interesting to see where they're at. So we have to be very versatile and very nimble. And especially that's one thing we definitely learn, or not really learn, it's something we've always done. It's fun to learn with our customers and deal with that, and very much enable whatever they want to do in the best way we can. There's also times where it may not work, and we have to be okay with that too, because like we have to learn and adjust our software and get better. That's one of the parts of this. It's constantly evolving, and for us, it's very much on the software front.
Just last word to you, Guilhem. I just wanted to bring you in and find out how you see the next few years developing for this area of technology and your relationship to it. We've got about a minute left.
First off, I fully concur with what Jeremy and John just said, that there is as many workflows as there are people, using video products. That's very clear. And we have to adapt. And this we summarized already a few years ago in our communication, in our presentation, when we said, okay, we don't want our customers to adapt to our products anymore. We want our products to adapt to the customer. And this is why our cameras are so packed with stuff inside. You buy the latest PTZ camera, it has assisted to telemonitoring, it has NDI, it has NDIH, it has XLR, it has everything. So, the camera is not enough anymore. We need to have everything packed inside so that the customers can, tick the box, because having the best sensor is not enough. Having the best zoom is not enough. You need to be able to tick all these IT, IP boxes, as Jeremy says. So this is clearly the direction we are going, so that the camera is packed with all the IT stuff that is needed or asked by our customers, so that they can build their own workflows with our systems. This is really the concept. So whatever comes up in terms of new protocols and stuff, we will assess and implement.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that. Much appreciated. Thanks very much for taking part. There will be a longer piece of coverage in the summer edition of the magazine of this roundtable, with extra thoughts and so on. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on.